They've been quiet for more than a decade, but a new report says extreme anti-government militia movements are cropping up all over the country. Far from the regular discourse of vigorous public debate, these groups are accused of using violence and sometimes deadly displays of force, like the Oklahoma City bombing of a federal building, of course, that killed 168 people. The attacks, often fueled by rumors, conspiracy theories, and hate speech. Caroline Shively is live in Washington with more on this. Caroline.
Rick, the Southern Poverty Law Center says these anti-government militia groups are gaining ground in the Midwest, Pacific Northwest, and the Deep South. It points to several reasons: a tough economy, a liberal administration, and even the fact we have a black president. One YouTube posting by the Ohio militia shows a guy in a mask holding a semi-automatic rifle, calling it a wake-up call for America. It's been viewed more than 60,000 times. The report says another militia group called the Idaho Citizens Constitutional Militia had recently posted an opening for a field sniper. Now, the report also has a list of recent hate crimes, like the Holocaust Museum shooting allegedly by a white supremacist, and the murder of an immigration activist and his 9-year-old daughter, plus the fatal shooting of a late-term abortion doctor in Kansas. But the report also lists groups that many consider mainstream, some people who attended the Tea Party tax protests, the National Rifle Association. It also mentions Texas Governor Rick Perry raising the prospect of secession. Now, the center maintains that those groups are taking on some aspects of right-wing anti-government groups, something those groups deny. Rick?
Caroline, thank you very much. So what's behind the rise in the militia movement? How do they operate? What separates these movements from legitimate government opposition and the right to free speech? Joining us is Mark Potok, who is the director of the Southern Poverty Law Center, which conducted the militia study that Caroline just talked about. Good to talk to you, sir. So specifically, where do you get proof, aside from some isolated incidents, that this is a growing trend across the country?
Sure, fair enough question. I don't think it's at all isolated. We've got not only reports, all kinds of evidence of these groups actually doing training in the woods as they did back in the 90s. There's a huge number of these groups that have essentially come back to life, or in many cases, at least 50 we've been able to find, where new groups have formed, and it's probably a good many more than that.
What do you think these findings
Let me say
mean?
that I'm sorry?
What do you think these findings mean?
Well, I think that this is a kind of convergence of factors that are driving these groups. I think that, as you mentioned in the intro in Christine's report, the election of Obama as president, the diminishing majority of whites in this country, the state of the economy, and the fact that we have a black man as president, all have contributed to some people, some fairly sizable number of people in this country, feeling that somehow the country that their kind of Christian white forefathers built has been taken from them.
Mr. Potok, your organization, and I apologize for cutting you off, I just want to get as much information in as we can. Your organization is not the only one to point out a supposed rise in the number of groups that you're referring to. But I think to a lot of people, it sounds like an attempt to perhaps diminish or undercut the views and the voices of a lot of people around the country who have legitimate concerns about the size of our government and some of the policies that are being put out there. Is that what your report is trying to do?
I don't think so. I think there's a difference between, as you say, perfectly reasonable and straight-ahead criticism of the government, which every citizen of a democracy is absolutely allowed, and the floating of fantastic conspiracy theories that in many cases have helped drive people to violence.
When you watch
for
the
instance,
healthcare...
the idea that FEMA, for instance, is running a secret series of concentration camps in order to imprison Americans, or that President Obama is secretly planning re-education camps for our children. Those kinds of ideas, certainly not in all cases, but in some percentage of cases, drive people to feel that they have to defend their kind of freedoms, their liberty, at the point of a gun. And so that is what is worrying.
When you watch the healthcare town halls, I don't know how much of this you've been watching from down in Alabama, but these debates that have been taking place where people who are very angry and upset about the proposals that are being made about our health care in this country, they confront their politicians. When you look at the crowd and some of the people who stand up to voice their concerns, do you see Timothy McVeigh's in waiting?
No, not necessarily at all, but I do think that some of the ideas of the militia movement are in some cases expressed by those very same people. Yesterday in New Hampshire, there was a man at one of the town hall meetings who said something to the effect of we should send illegal aliens, quote unquote, back to Mexico with a bullet in their brains. He went on to talk about watering the tree of liberty, paraphrasing Thomas Jefferson, needing to be watered with the blood of tyrants and patriots every 10 years. So, you know, while I cannot say that that man had anything to do with the militia movement, that is very much an idea of the militia movement. Back in the 90s, there was much quoting of Thomas Jefferson and that idea, and in fact, Timothy McVeigh used that very same phrase.
And there were a lot of people who used similar phrases in going after President Bush while he was in office. One more question for you, sir, and I'm just wondering what you say to your critics who say that you're crying wolf with this report and that you are a professional fearmonger. Those are some of the charges that I found against you personally today when I was researching to conduct this interview. What do you say to those people?
Well, I guess what I would say is that's hogwash, and you know, you will have to simply, you know, people will have to look around and decide whether what we're saying makes sense. You know, one thing I would point out is that there are a great many law enforcement agencies, both federal and state and local, all three, around this country who are reporting very, very similar activity. As a matter of fact, we quote a high-ranking law enforcement official in the report who talks about the idea that not in 10 or 12 years have we seen this level of activity, and as he said, all it is lacking is a spark. And I think that that is actually a sober and accurate assessment of what's really going on out there.
Mark Potok is with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Thank you very much for joining us today, sir. We appreciate it.
Police